The cold bit through Lynn's thin jacket as she hurried down the busy city street. Winter had come early this year, and the icy wind cut through her worn clothes like they weren't even there. Her stomach growled loudly, a painful reminder that she hadn't eaten anything substantial in almost 2 days. The small bag of chips she'd managed to buy yesterday with her last few coins was long gone. At 21, Lynn had been on her own for nearly 8 months now. 8 months since she'd made the difficult choice to leave home with nothing but a backpack, containing some clothes and a few precious belongings. 8 months of struggling to find steady work, of sleeping in shelters when she could get a bed, and in hidden corners of parks when she couldn't. 8 months of hunger that never really went away. Lynn paused at a crosswalk, her eyes drawn to the warm glow coming from a restaurant across the street. "The Silver Leaf," read the elegant sign above the door. Through the large windows she could see people inside, laughing and talking as they enjoyed their meals. The sight made her stomach clench painfully. As the light changed, Lynn found herself crossing toward the restaurant instead of continuing on her way to the shelter. She didn't have a plan exactly. Maybe they needed a dishwasher. Maybe someone had left something on their plate that was headed for the trash. At this point, her hunger was doing the thinking for her. She hesitated outside the door, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and though she tried to stay clean using bathroom sinks in public libraries and the occasional shower at the shelter, she knew her appearance gave her away. Her jeans were worn at the knees, her shoes scuffed and beginning to come apart at the seams. The nice jacket she'd brought from home had been stolen at a shelter 2 months ago, leaving her with only this thin windbreaker someone had given her. Through the window, Lynn caught sight of something that made her heart skip. A beautiful grand piano sat in the corner of the restaurant. It gleamed under the soft lighting, its lid propped open. Currently, no one was playing it. Lynn pressed her hand against the cold glass, a memory washing over her. The piano in her grandmother's tiny apartment, where she'd first learned to play as a little girl. How her grandmother's eyes would light up watching Lynn's small fingers find the right keys, creating melodies that filled their modest home with something magical. How Lynn had practiced for hours every day after school, finding refuge in music when life at home became difficult. Her grandmother had been gone for 5 years now. The piano had been sold to pay bills, and the dream of music school had died when Lynn had been forced to leave home earlier this year. But seeing that piano now awakened something in her. Before she could think better of it, Lynn pushed open the heavy door and stepped into the warmth of the restaurant. The delicious smells hit her immediately: roasting meat, garlic, freshly baked bread, making her dizzy with hunger. A host looked up from his station near the door, his welcoming smile faltering slightly as he took in her appearance. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone a careful balance between professional courtesy and wariness. Lynn opened her mouth, not sure what she was going to say when her eyes drifted again to the piano. "I noticed your piano," she said softly. "Does someone play it?" The host followed her gaze. "We usually have a pianist on Friday and Saturday evenings, but he called in sick tonight." Lynn took a deep breath. "I can play," she said. "I can play well, if I could just have something to eat." The host's expression changed, a mixture of surprise and disbelief crossing his face. Before he could respond, a man in an expensive suit approached. From the way the host straightened up, Lynn guessed this was the manager or owner. "Is there a problem here, David?" the man asked, his eyes flickering over Lynn with poorly disguised disapproval. "No, Mr. Reynolds. This young woman was just—" The host hesitated. "I was asking if I could play the piano in exchange for some food," Lynn said, forcing herself to meet the manager's eyes despite the shame burning in her chest. "I'm a good player. I promise I won't disappoint you." Mr. Reynolds' eyebrows rose and he exchanged a look with the host. A few nearby waiters had stopped to listen, and Lynn could see the smirks they were trying to hide. Her cheeks burned hotter. "You want to play our Steinway? For food?" Mr. Reynolds asked slowly, as if the concept was difficult to grasp. "Yes, sir," Lynn replied, her voice smaller now. "I haven't eaten in a while, and I thought I could provide some music for your customers while they dine." One of the waiters snickered outright now. "Maybe she can bang out chopsticks for the dinner crowd," he whispered to another. Not quite quietly enough. Mr. Reynolds seemed to consider for a moment, his eyes traveling from Lynn's worn shoes up to her messy hair. Then a small amused smile touched his lips. "All right, he said, gesturing toward the piano. Why not? Entertainment is entertainment. If you can actually play. The emphasis he placed on actually made it clear he doubted she could. Then yes, we'll feed you. Lynn's heart leapt. Thank you, she said earnestly. Thank you so much. As she followed Mr. Reynolds through the restaurant, she was acutely aware of the stares from both staff and customers. A young woman in a business suit whispered something to her dining companion, both of them watching Lynn with curious eyes. A family with 2 children fell silent as she passed their table, the parents pulling their children closer as if homelessness might be contagious. Here you are, Mr. Reynolds said, gesturing to the piano bench. Let's see what you can do. There was challenge in his voice, and Lynn could tell he was expecting this to be a brief and possibly amusing interlude before he sent her on her way. The waiters had gathered near the bar to watch. Lynn heard one of them say, "This should be good," followed by muffled laughter. Lynn sat down at the bench, her hands trembling slightly, partly from hunger, partly from nervousness. The piano was magnificent, far better than any she'd ever played. She gently placed her fingers on the keys, feeling their cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. For a moment, she closed her eyes. What should she play? Something to show her skill, certainly, but also something that would speak to these people, something that might make them see her as more than just a hungry stranger off the street. With a deep breath, Lynn began to play. The first notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the restaurant. Lynn had always loved this piece. The way it began so delicately, like moonlight just starting to touch the surface of a lake. Her fingers moved with practiced precision despite her exhaustion, muscle memory taking over where her tired mind might have faltered. As the piece progressed, Lynn lost herself in the music. The hunger pangs receded, the stares faded away, and there was only the piano and the beautiful sounds it made under her hands. She leaned into the crescendos, her body swaying slightly with the emotion of the piece, then pulled back for the softer passages, coaxing the notes out like whispered secrets. She didn't notice when the talking in the restaurant gradually stopped. Didn't see when Mr. Reynolds' smug smile faded into open-mouthed surprise. Didn't realize that every person in the restaurant had turned to watch her. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations halted mid-sentence. When the final notes faded away, Lynn opened her eyes, suddenly aware of the complete silence that had fallen. For a terrible moment, she thought she'd done something wrong. Then the applause began, first from a single table near the piano, then spreading throughout the restaurant until everyone was clapping, some people even rising to their feet. Lynn turned to look at Mr. Reynolds, who stood frozen, his expression one of complete shock. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked when the applause had died down. "My grandmother taught me when I was little," Lynn said, "and I practiced whenever I could. I was going to apply to music school, but..." She trailed off, not wanting to share the details of why that dream had never materialized. Mr. Reynolds seemed to collect himself. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "that was unexpected and quite good." One of the waiters who had been laughing earlier approached. "That was amazing," he said, genuine admiration in his voice now. "Do you know any Chopin?" Lynn nodded. "I know several of his pieces. Play another," called a woman from a nearby table. Others joined in, encouraging her to continue. Mr. Reynolds held up a hand. "First things first," he said. He turned to the waiter. "Tom, please bring..." He looked at Lynn. "What's your name?" "Lynn," she replied. "Please bring Lynn a proper meal. Whatever she would like." He turned back to Lynn. "You play while you wait, and after you've eaten we can discuss a more permanent arrangement." Lynn's eyes widened. "A permanent arrangement?" Mr. Reynolds nodded. "We've been looking for a regular pianist for our dinner service. If you can play like that consistently, I'd be interested in hiring you, with actual money, not just food," he added with a small smile. For the first time in months, Lynn felt a flicker of hope. She turned back to the keys, a real smile spreading across her face as her fingers found the opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. As she played, a waiter discreetly placed a glass of water and a basket of warm bread on a small table within her reach. The smell made her mouth water, but Lynn kept playing, pouring her heart into the music. For this moment, at least, she wasn't just a hungry girl on the streets. She was a musician again, and maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change. The bread was still warm as Lynn took a small bite, trying not to devour it all at once despite her hunger. She continued playing with one hand while reaching for the food with the other, a skill she had mastered years ago during long practice sessions at her grandmother's apartment when she didn't want to stop for meals. As the rich notes of Chopin filled the restaurant, Lynn noticed a well-dressed older woman at a corner table watching her intently. Unlike the other patrons who were now returning to their conversations while occasionally glancing her way, this woman's attention never wavered. There was something in her gaze, not pity or curiosity, but a kind of recognition that made Lynn's fingers falter slightly before she recovered. When Tom returned with a steaming plate of pasta and vegetables, Lynn finished her piece to another round of applause. She smiled shyly at the diners before turning her attention to the food. The smell alone made her dizzy with anticipation. "Take a proper break," Mr. Reynolds said, his tone noticeably warmer now. "Eat your dinner. Then you can play another set." Lynn nodded gratefully. As she picked up her fork, she noticed the older woman from the corner table approaching. She was tall and elegant, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her clothes were simple but clearly expensive, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice gentle but commanding. "I hope I'm not intruding on your meal, but I wanted to speak with you." Lynn swallowed her bite of pasta. "That's okay," she said, setting down her fork reluctantly. The woman smiled. "Please continue eating. I know what it's like to be hungry." Something in the way she said it made Lynn believe that she truly did know. "My name is Eleanor Zhao," the woman continued, taking a seat beside the piano bench. "I taught piano at the Westridge Conservatory for over 30 years before retiring last spring." Lynn's eyes widened. The Westridge Conservatory was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. She had dreamed of applying there once in what now felt like another lifetime. "Your playing is extraordinary," Eleanor said simply, particularly considering the circumstances. She gestured discreetly at Lynn's worn clothes. "May I ask where you studied?" Lynn looked down at her plate. "I didn't, not formally. My grandmother taught me basics when I was little. After that, I mostly taught myself." Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "Self-taught? That's remarkable. Your technique has some unconventional elements, but your musicality is undeniable. The emotion you bring to Debussy." She shook her head in wonder. "How did you access instruments to practice if you didn't study formally?" Lynn took another bite of pasta before answering, savoring the rich flavors. "Libraries sometimes have practice rooms, and there was a music store near my high school that let students try out their pianos after classes. The owner was nice. He said I helped sell instruments because people would hear me playing and want to learn." She smiled faintly at the memory. "When things got bad at home, I'd find places with pianos. Community centers, churches. Sometimes I'd just look through windows until I saw one, then ask if I could play." "And how long have you been?" Eleanor hesitated. "Homeless?" Lynn supplied the word without bitterness. "About 8 months. But I've been playing since I was 6. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. 15 years of practice, then. It shows. She glanced around the restaurant. "This opportunity is wonderful, but your talent deserves more." Before Lynn could respond, Mr. Reynolds returned to the piano. "When you've finished eating, Miss Lynn, we'd like you to play for another hour, if you're up to it. The customers are quite taken with your performance." He looked at Eleanor. "I see you've met Ms. Zhao. She's one of our regular patrons and a true music lover." Eleanor smiled politely. "I was just telling this young woman that her playing is exceptional." "Indeed it is," Mr. Reynolds agreed. "Which is why I'm prepared to offer her a regular position here 3 evenings a week. With proper pay, of course." He turned to Lynn. "What do you say? $200 per evening plus meals. We can discuss a proper schedule once you've finished tonight." Lynn nearly choked on her water. $600 a week would change everything. She could find a small room to rent, buy decent clothes, maybe even save a little. That's very generous," she managed to say. "Thank you." Mr. Reynolds looked pleased. "Excellent. I'll have the paperwork ready before you leave tonight." He nodded to them both before walking away to greet new customers arriving at the door. Eleanor waited until he was out of earshot before speaking again. "That is a generous offer and you should take it," she said. "But I have another proposition for you as well." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a business card. The Westridge Conservatory has a special scholarship program for exceptional talents who lack formal training. The spring auditions are in 3 weeks. Lynn stared at the card in Eleanor's outstretched hand. I couldn't possibly— You can, Eleanor said firmly. Your technique needs refinement, yes, but your natural musicality is extraordinary. I'd like to help you prepare for the audition. Lynn took the card with trembling fingers. Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me. Eleanor's expression softened. Because 35 years ago someone did the same for me. I was not so different from you. Different circumstances, perhaps, but the same hunger, both for food and for music. She smiled. Besides, helping extraordinary talent is what I've dedicated my life to. It would be a pleasure to work with you. Lynn looked down at the elegant card in her hand, then back at the kind but determined face of this unexpected ally. Something warm and unfamiliar bloomed in her chest. Not just hope, but possibility. I don't have anywhere to practice, she said, her practical concerns surfacing. I have a piano at my home, Eleanor replied, and there are practice rooms at the community center where I volunteer. We'll find a way. She glanced at Lynn's empty plate. It seems you've finished your meal. Why don't you play your next set and we can talk more afterwards? Lynn nodded, suddenly energized despite her exhaustion. As Eleanor returned to her table, Lynn turned back to the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys as she considered what to play next. Something more challenging, perhaps. Something to show Eleanor what she was truly capable of. She began Bach's Prelude in G minor, her fingers flying over the keys with newfound confidence. As she played, she was aware of phones being raised throughout the restaurant, people recording her performance. Under normal circumstances, this might have made her nervous, but tonight she welcomed it. Let them see her. Let them hear what she could do. By the time she finished her second set, a small crowd had gathered around the piano. The restaurant had filled completely, with people waiting at the bar for tables to open up. Lynn heard snippets of conversation as she played. Who is she? Where did she come from? Have you ever heard anyone play like that? When she finally stood, her fingers aching pleasantly from the extended playing, the entire restaurant burst into applause. Mr. Reynolds approached with a wide smile, any trace of his earlier condescension completely gone. Magnificent, he said. Simply magnificent. I've already had 3 customers ask if you'll be playing tomorrow night as well. Lynn glanced at Eleanor, who gave her an encouraging nod. I'd be happy to, Lynn said. Thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Reynolds led her to his office to complete some paperwork. As she signed the simple contract, he handed her an envelope. Your payment for tonight. I've included a small advance as well, for proper attire, he added, not unkindly. Lynn thanked him, clutching the envelope tightly. After they finished, she found Eleanor waiting for her near the entrance. My car's outside, the older woman said. I thought perhaps you might need a ride to the shelter tonight. Lynn hesitated. Actually, I was planning to use some of this money for a hotel room. Just for tonight. The thought of a real bed, a private shower, and a door that locked was almost too wonderful to imagine. Eleanor nodded. A good idea. There's a decent place 2 blocks from here that offers weekly rates. Much more practical than a night-by-night hotel if you're planning to stay in the area. She paused, and it's close to my apartment, which would be convenient for our practice sessions. As they walked out into the cool night air, Lynn felt as though she were walking in a dream. This morning she had been digging through her backpack for forgotten crumbs. Now she had money in her pocket, a job, and possibly a future she had thought forever lost to her. A couple leaving the restaurant pointed at her, whispering excitedly. One of them approached. Excuse me, but are you the pianist who was just playing? My wife and I recorded some of your performance, and it's already getting attention online. People are asking who you are. Lynn glanced uncertainly at Eleanor, who smiled encouragingly. My name is Lynn, she said simply. I'm a pianist. For the first time in 8 months, the words felt true again. She wasn't just a homeless girl anymore. She was Lynn, the pianist, and people were listening. As Eleanor's car pulled away from the curb, Lynn watched the lights of the restaurant recede in the side mirror. One door had closed 8 months ago when she left home. Tonight, another had opened. She just needed the courage to walk through it. Lynn woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, panic gripped her as she tried to remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The restaurant, the piano, Eleanor, and this small but clean room she'd rented with her first payment. She sat up slowly, still not quite believing yesterday had been real. The envelope with the remaining money lay on the nightstand beside her. She picked it up, counting the bills again. After paying for a week at this boarding house, she still had enough for some new clothes and a few basic necessities. A soft knock at her door made her jump. "Lynn? Are you awake?" Eleanor's voice came through the door. They had arranged to meet this morning, but Lynn hadn't expected her to come to the boarding house. "Just a minute," Lynn called, quickly pulling on her clothes from yesterday and running her fingers through her tangled hair. When she opened the door, Eleanor stood there with 2 takeout coffee cups and a paper bag that smelled of pastries. "I thought you might enjoy breakfast," she said, handing Lynn one of the cups. Lynn accepted it gratefully. "Thank you. I was going to go shopping for some food today." "We can do that after our first session," Eleanor said, stepping into the small room when Lynn moved aside. "But first, I brought something to show you." She set down the paper bag and pulled out her phone, tapping the screen a few times before turning it toward Lynn. It was a video titled, "Homeless Piano Prodigy Stuns Diners at the Silver Leaf." The thumbnail showed Lynn at the piano, her face partly visible in profile. "This was posted last night," Eleanor explained. "It already has over 50,000 views." Lynn stared at the screen in disbelief. 50,000? But how? "People love stories of unexpected talent," Eleanor said, sitting on the room's only chair while Lynn perched on the edge of the bed. "And your playing truly is exceptional. Look at the comments." Lynn scrolled through dozens of amazed responses. "Incredible talent. Who is she? Get this girl a record deal." "I'm in tears listening to this." "This could be helpful for your future," Eleanor said, taking back her phone. "But it also means we need to move quickly. Opportunities will come, but so will people looking to exploit your story." Lynn nodded, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. Yesterday she'd been invisible, just another homeless person people avoided eye contact with on the street. Today thousands of strangers had seen her play. "I don't know if I'm ready for all this," she admitted. Eleanor's expression softened. "You don't have to be ready for all of it right now. Today we focus only on the music. One step at a time." She opened the paper bag and handed Lynn a still warm croissant. "Eat first. Then we'll go to my apartment and see where you stand with your repertoire." Eleanor's apartment was modest but elegant, with large windows that filled the living room with natural light. The centerpiece was a beautiful upright piano, not as grand as the one at the restaurant but clearly well maintained. "It's a Yamaha U3, Eleanor explained as Lynn ran her fingers lightly over the keys. "I downsized when I moved here after retirement, but I couldn't bear to part with a good instrument." Lynn played a few experimental notes, feeling the action of the keys. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Now," Eleanor said, settling into an armchair near the piano, "I'd like to hear what you can do without an audience. Play whatever you feel represents your abilities best." Lynn thought for a moment, then began to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. She had learned it by listening and by studying free sheet music at the library, working through it note by note over many months. The haunting first movement had always spoken to her, especially during her hardest times. Eleanor listened with her eyes closed, her expression unreadable. When Lynn finished, she opened her eyes and nodded. "Your emotional connection to the music is profound," she said. "Now try this." She stood and retrieved a book of sheet music from a nearby shelf, opening it to Chopin's Fantasy Impromptu. Lynn stared at the complex notation. I can't sight read very well," she admitted, embarrassment heating her cheeks. "That's exactly what I suspected," Eleanor said, not unkindly. "You've learned by ear and by memory, which is remarkable, but for the audition, you'll need to demonstrate some reading ability." For the next 3 hours, they worked on basic sight-reading exercises. Eleanor was patient but firm, pushing Lynn to translate the symbols on the page into music without relying solely on her ear. By the end of the session, Lynn's head was spinning with sharps, flats, and time signatures. "You're a quick study," Eleanor said as they took a break. "Your ear training is exceptional, which helps. But we have a lot of ground to cover in 3 weeks." Lynn rubbed her tired eyes. "Do you really think I have a chance at this scholarship?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Yes, I do. Your natural talent is undeniable. But talent alone isn't enough. It will take hard work every day to prepare you properly." I'm not afraid of hard work, Lynn said, straightening her shoulders. Eleanor smiled. I can see that. Now let's take a break for lunch and then we'll work on your audition pieces. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. By day, Lynn practiced with Eleanor, working on technique, theory, and sight reading. By night, she played at the Silver Leaf where word of her talent had spread, drawing larger crowds each evening. Mr. Reynolds was delighted with the increase in business. You're a sensation, he told her after a particularly busy Friday night. People are making reservations just to hear you play. Lynn smiled politely, but her mind was already on tomorrow's practice session. The audition was only a week away now, and despite her progress, she still felt woefully unprepared compared to students who had been studying formally for years. As she gathered her things to leave, a well-dressed man approached her at the piano. Ms. Lynn, my name is Philip Chen. I'm a producer with Horizon Records. He handed her a business card. Your videos have caught our attention. We'd be interested in discussing a recording contract with you. Lynn blinked in surprise. A recording contract? Your story is compelling, Philip said. The homeless girl with the gift for classical piano, it's marketable. We could have an album ready by Christmas. Lynn thought about the hours she'd spent with Eleanor, learning to read music properly, understanding the theory behind what her fingers could already do. What kind of album did you have in mind? Popular classical pieces, of course. Maybe some background on your life story between tracks. We'd need to move quickly, though, while the viral interest is still high. Something about his tone made Lynn uneasy. Can I think about it and call you? Philip smiled. Of course. But don't wait too long. These opportunities are fleeting. When he left, Lynn immediately called Eleanor. He said they want to rush an album while people are still interested in my story, Lynn explained after describing the encounter. Eleanor sighed. I was afraid of this. Philip Chen has a reputation for quick projects that exploit trending talents. His albums sell initially because of the story, but they rarely lead to lasting careers. What should I do? Lynn asked, clutching the phone tightly. What do you want, Lynn? A quick album that might make some money but fade just as quickly? Or a chance at a real musical education that could sustain you for life? Lynn didn't hesitate. I want the education. I want to be known for my music, not my story. Then keep your focus on the audition, Eleanor said firmly. There will be time for recording contracts later, with people who value your artistry over your marketability. After they hung up, Lynn walked slowly back to her boarding house. The streets that had once been her home now felt different. She passed a young man huddled in a doorway, a cardboard sign beside him. Without hesitation, she placed some of her tip money in his cup. Thank you, he said, looking up with surprise at her generous donation. Things can change, she told him, sometimes when you least expect it. As she continued walking, Lynn thought about how quickly her life had transformed. 3 weeks ago, she had been hungry and hopeless. Now she had a job, a roof over her head, and a shot at a future she had thought lost forever. But with these opportunities came new pressures and decisions. The viral videos had brought attention she wasn't prepared for. People recognized her on the street now. Customers at the restaurant asked for selfies. Yesterday, a local news station had called wanting an interview. Eleanor had helped her navigate most of it, shielding her from those who seemed more interested in exploiting her story than supporting her talent. But the pressure was mounting as the audition drew closer. Lynn reached her room and closed the door, leaning against it with a deep sigh. On her small bedside table sat the pieces she would play for the audition. Bach, Chopin, and an etude Eleanor had selected to showcase her technical abilities. She had practiced them until her fingers ached, but doubt still nagged at her. What if she froze? What if the judges saw through her, recognized her as an imposter among properly trained musicians? Lynn sat at the edge of her bed, closing her eyes and imagining the keys beneath her fingers. Even without a piano, she could feel the music, could trace the patterns her hands would make. 1 week, she whispered to herself. 1 week to prove I belong there. Outside her window, the city continued its evening rhythm, unaware of the quiet battle being waged in one small room. A battle between a lifetime of insecurity and a newfound hope that perhaps, just perhaps, Lynn's music might find its rightful place in the world. The morning of the audition arrived with gray skies and a light drizzle that tapped against Lynn's window. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the pieces she would perform over and over until the notes blurred together in an anxious haze. Now, as she got dressed in the new outfit she'd bought specifically for today, simple black pants and a navy blue blouse, her hands trembled slightly. A text from Eleanor lit up her phone screen. "Car will pick you up in 30 minutes. Remember to breathe. You're ready for this." Lynn took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Was she really ready? In just 3 weeks, she had crammed in what most students learned over years of formal training. Despite Eleanor's confidence, Lynn couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to be exposed as a fraud among real musicians. She picked up her folder of sheet music, running her fingers over the pages she had studied so intensely. 3 weeks ago, these marks on paper had been largely mysterious to her. Now she could translate them into sound, though not as fluently as she would like. Eleanor had assured her that her playing would compensate for any weaknesses in her sight reading, but doubt still gnawed at her. The honk of a car horn outside pulled her from her thoughts. Lynn gathered her things, took one last look around her small room, and headed out into the rain. The Westridge Conservatory was housed in a grand old building of red brick and white stone. As the car pulled up to the entrance, Lynn stared through the rain-streaked window at the place she had once dreamed of attending. Students hurried up and down the wide steps, instrument cases slung over their shoulders, umbrellas bobbing above their heads. They all looked so confident, so at home in this world. Eleanor was waiting under the portico, her silver hair neatly pinned back, an umbrella in one hand. She smiled when she saw Lynn, but there was concern in her eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked as Lynn approached. Lynn shook her head. "Not really." "That's normal before an audition," Eleanor said, guiding her inside. "The important thing is that you've practiced properly, which you have. Your body knows what to do even if your mind is tired." They walked through marble hallways lined with photographs of famous alumni and past performances. Students and faculty members nodded respectfully to Eleanor as they passed, a few giving curious glances to Lynn. Professor Zhao, a young man in a suit, called, hurrying toward them. "I thought that was you. It's been too long." "Min-ho," Eleanor greeted him warmly. "Lynn, this is Professor Park, head of the piano department and one of the judges for today's auditions." Lynn shook his hand, trying not to let her nervousness show. "Eleanor has told me about you," Professor Park said, studying her with keen interest. "Your story is quite remarkable." "Thank you," Lynn said quietly, unsure how to respond. Was he referring to her musical ability or to her having been homeless? The distinction suddenly seemed important. Lynn will be performing Bach's Prelude in C minor, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, and Liszt's La Campanella, Eleanor said, smoothly changing the subject. Professor Park raised his eyebrows. "An ambitious program for someone without formal training." "Lynn is an ambitious person," Eleanor replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, I look forward to hearing you play," he said to Lynn. "Your audition is in 45 minutes. Practice room 7 is available if you'd like to warm up." With a nod to them both, he continued down the hallway. "Don't mind Min-ho," Eleanor said as they walked toward the practice rooms. "He's actually quite fair as a judge, despite his sometimes prickly manner." Lynn nodded, but her confidence was shaken. If that was how a professor reacted to her background, what would the other students think? As if reading her thoughts, Eleanor stopped and turned to face her. "Lynn, listen to me. Everyone here has a different path, but music is the common language. Once you start to play, nothing else matters. Not where you came from, not how you learned. Only the music." Lynn took a deep breath. "I know, it's just also different from what I'm used to." "Different doesn't mean better or worse," Eleanor said firmly. "Now let's get you warmed up." Practice room 7 was small but well equipped, with a Yamaha grand piano that reminded Lynn of the one at the Silverleaf. She sat at the bench, adjusting her posture the way Eleanor had taught her, and began her warm-up exercises. The familiar movement of her fingers across the keys calmed her somewhat. This at least she knew how to do. As she moved from exercises into her first piece, she lost herself in the music, forgetting momentarily where she was and what was at stake. A knock on the door startled her back to reality. Eleanor poked her head in. "It's time." Lynn followed her to a large rehearsal hall where 3 judges, including Professor Park, sat at a long table. About a dozen other people, faculty members and senior students, Eleanor had explained, sat in chairs along the walls. "Lin Chen," Professor Park announced, consulting his notes. self-taught pianist applying for the Special Talent Scholarship. You may begin when ready. Lynn approached the grand piano at the center of the room. Aware of every eye upon her, she adjusted the bench, placed her hands on the keys, and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The Bach came first, the complex counterpoint flowing from her fingers with precision and clarity. Lynn focused on the music, pushing away thoughts of the judges, of her past, of everything except the notes rising and falling beneath her hands. When she finished the first piece, there was a brief silence before Professor Park said, "Continue to the Chopin, please." The nocturne had always been one of Lynn's favorites. She had played it countless times in empty churches and community centers, finding in its melancholy beauty a reflection of her own loneliness. Now she poured that emotion into every note, letting the music speak of both sorrow and hope. As the final notes faded, Lynn heard a small sound from one of the observers, a quickly stifled sob. She glanced up briefly to see an older faculty member dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "And finally the list," Professor Park said, his voice noticeably softer. Lynn straightened her shoulders. La Campanella was the most technically challenging piece in her program, one that Eleanor had been hesitant to include. "It's extremely difficult," she had warned, "but if you can play it well, it will showcase your technical abilities in a way the judges can't ignore." They had worked on it tirelessly, breaking down the complex passages, drilling the hand crossings and rapid jumps until Lynn's fingers could find the notes almost by instinct. Now, as she launched into the piece, she felt a strange calm descend over her. The room, the judges, even her own doubts fell away, leaving only the music. Her hands flew over the keys, finding the intricate patterns with a sureness that surprised even her. When she hit the final chord, the room remained silent for several heartbeats. Then from the back, someone began to clap. Others joined in until the applause filled the room. Professor Park held up a hand, silencing the room. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. The committee will now ask a few questions and test your music theory knowledge." What followed was the part Lynn had dreaded most. The judges took turns asking her about musical notation, key signatures, and compositional structures, all areas where her self-taught background left significant gaps. She answered as best she could, occasionally glancing at Eleanor, who sat with an encouraging expression but could offer no help. And finally, Professor Park said, "Can you sight-read this piece for us?" He handed her a sheet of music she had never seen before. Lynn looked at the complex notation, her heart sinking. Despite all their practice, sight-reading remained her weakest skill. She placed the music on the stand, took a deep breath and began to play, stumbling through the unfamiliar piece with far less grace than her prepared program. When she finished, the room was quiet. Professor Park made a few notes, then looked up. "Thank you, Ms. Chen. The committee will deliberate and inform all applicants of our decision within 3 days." Lynn stood and bowed slightly, as Eleanor had taught her, then gathered her music and walked on unsteady legs to where Eleanor waited by the door. "You were magnificent," Eleanor whispered as they left the hall. The prepared pieces were flawless, but the sight reading was terrible, Lynn said, fighting back tears of frustration. "And I couldn't answer half their theory questions correctly." Eleanor guided her to a quiet corner of the hallway. "Lynn, listen to me. Yes, those areas need work. No one is denying that. But what you did with those 3 pieces..." She shook her head in wonder. "I've been teaching for over 30 years, and I've rarely heard such musicality, especially in someone your age." "Do you really think I have a chance?" Lynn asked, desperately wanting to believe it. "I do," Eleanor said firmly. "But whatever happens with this scholarship, your journey doesn't end here. This is just the beginning." As they walked out of the building into the now clearing sky, Lynn tried to hold on to those words. Whatever happened next, she had come further in the past month than she had dared to dream possible when she stood hungry outside the Silver Leaf, asking to play for food. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope that this was, indeed, just the beginning. 3 days felt like 3 years. Lynn continued playing at the Silver Leaf each evening, but her mind was elsewhere, constantly replaying her audition, imagining what the judges might be saying about her. The restaurant patrons noticed her distraction, though they still applauded enthusiastically after each performance. You seem a million miles away tonight, Mr. Reynolds commented after her set on the second evening. Everything all right? Lynn managed to smile. Just waiting for some news, she said. I should hear tomorrow, Mr. Reynolds nodded. Well, whatever it is, I hope it goes your way. But remember, you always have a place here. He gestured around at the packed restaurant. Our customers would riot if you left us completely. His kindness touched her. How different he was now from the skeptical man who had mockingly allowed her to play for food less than a month ago. On the morning of the third day, Lynn woke early, too anxious to sleep. She checked her phone immediately, no messages. Eleanor had promised to call the moment she heard anything, but the waiting was unbearable. To distract herself, Lynn decided to go for a walk. The spring air was crisp but not cold, flowers beginning to bloom in window boxes and tiny front gardens. She found herself wandering toward the park where she had sometimes slept during her months of homelessness. It looked different in daylight, less threatening, almost peaceful. Lynn sat on a bench watching children play on the swings while their parents chatted nearby. A month ago, these same parents might have hurried their children away if they saw Lynn approaching. A ragged, homeless young woman who looked like trouble. Now, in her clean clothes, with her hair neatly brushed, she was invisible in a different way, just another ordinary person enjoying the morning sun. The thought was both comforting and strange. Her phone rang, breaking her reverie. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. Lynn's heart pounded as she answered. Hello? Lynn. Eleanor's voice gave nothing away. Where are you? In the park near my boarding house, Lynn replied, her mouth suddenly dry. Do you have news? There was a pause. Yes, but I'd rather tell you in person. Can you meet me at the cafe on the corner of Maple and 5th in 15 minutes? Of course, Lynn said, already standing. I'll be right there. The walk to the cafe took only 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Lynn tried to read Eleanor's tone. Had it been happy? Sad? Just neutral? She couldn't tell. The cafe was busy with the morning rush, but Lynn spotted Eleanor immediately, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups already in front of her. Her expression was serious, and Lynn's heart sank. If the news had been good, surely Eleanor would be smiling. I got you tea, Eleanor said as Lynn slid into the chair opposite her. I remember you said you preferred it to coffee. Thank you, Lynn said, though her throat was too tight to drink anything. So what did they decide? Eleanor looked at her steadily. The committee was deeply impressed by your playing, she began. Professor Park said your interpretation of the Chopin was the most moving he'd heard from a student in years. Lynn waited, barely breathing. There was a but coming. She could feel it. However, Eleanor continued, and Lynn's heart plummeted. They also noted the significant gaps in your formal music education. Your theory knowledge and sight reading skills are well below the level they typically require, even for special talent scholarships. Lynn looked down at her untouched tea, fighting back tears. I understand, she said quietly. Thank you for trying, Eleanor. You've been so kind, and I've learned so much from you already. I'll keep practicing, and maybe next year— Lynn, Eleanor interrupted gently. I haven't finished. Lynn looked up, confused. The committee decided that your exceptional musical gift deserves nurturing, despite the technical gaps in your education. They're offering you a modified scholarship. Modified? Lynn repeated, hardly daring to hope. Eleanor nodded. Instead of joining the regular first-year program immediately, they're offering you a special 6-month preparatory course to bring your theory and sight reading up to standard, followed by full enrollment in the fall semester. The scholarship covers all tuition and includes a small stipend for living expenses. Lynn stared at her, unable to process what she was hearing. They're accepting me. They're investing in you, Eleanor corrected with a smile. They believe, as I do, that with the right training you could become truly exceptional. The tears Lynn had been holding back spilled over. I can't believe it, she whispered. 6 months ago I was sleeping in that park I just left, wondering if I'd ever play a piano again. Now, Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You earned this, Lynn. Your talent, your determination, your hard work. That's what made this happen. Lynn wiped her eyes, embarrassed but too happy to care about the other cafe patrons who might be watching. When do I start? Classes begin next week, Eleanor said. I'll be teaching some of your theory coursework, actually. The committee thought a familiar face might help with the transition. Lynn nodded gratefully. And the silver leaf? I should tell Mr. Reynolds. I think you can still play there once or twice a week if you want to, Eleanor said. It would be good practice performing for an audience and the extra money wouldn't hurt. But your studies must come first now. Of course, Lynn agreed immediately. I won't waste this opportunity. I promise. As they left the cafe together, Lynn felt as though she were walking several inches above the sidewalk. The city around her, once a place of hardship and hunger, now seemed full of possibility. 6 months later, Lynn stood backstage at the Westridge Conservatory's main recital hall, peering through the curtains at the gathering audience. Her preparatory program was coming to an end, and tonight was her first formal recital as a student of the conservatory, a chance to show how far she had come. Eleanor appeared beside her, elegant in a formal black dress. Nervous? She asked. Lynn nodded. A little. It's a bigger audience than I'm used to. Bigger than the Silver Leaf on a Saturday night? Eleanor teased. Lynn smiled. Different anyway. These people know music. They'll hear every mistake. They'll also hear your heart, Eleanor said. That's what matters most. A stagehand approached. 5 minutes, Miss Chen. Lynn nodded, taking a deep breath. As the stagehand walked away, she turned back to Eleanor. I've been meaning to ask you something. That first night at the restaurant. Why did you stay to talk to me? You could have just left a nice tip and gone home. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. When I was younger, much younger than you, I was in a very difficult situation. Not homeless, but lost. A teacher recognized something in me that I couldn't see in myself and changed the course of my life. She smiled. I promised myself I would do the same if I ever had the chance. Lynn hugged her impulsively. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. Just play your best tonight, Eleanor said, returning the hug. That's all the thanks I need. As Lynn walked onto the stage a few minutes later, the applause washing over her, she caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. Mr. Reynolds and several staff members from the Silver Leaf sat in the third row. Behind them, she spotted the owner of the music store who had let her practice after school all those years ago. And there, near the back, was a group of young people she recognized from the local shelter where she now volunteered once a week, teaching basic piano to anyone interested. Lynn took her seat at the grand piano, adjusted the bench and looked out at the audience one more time. So many paths had led to this moment, some painful, some beautiful, all necessary. As she placed her fingers on the keys, Lynn thought about the scared, hungry girl who had stood outside the Silver Leaf that cold evening, gathering courage to ask if she could play for food. That girl could never have imagined this future, yet somehow had never stopped believing in the power of music to transform a life. Lynn began to play. The piece was Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, challenging, emotional, and perfect for tonight. As the music filled the hall, she poured everything into it. Her struggles, her triumphs, her gratitude, and her dreams. This was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, years of study, perhaps setbacks and disappointments. But in this moment, Lynn was exactly where she belonged. Her fingers dancing across the keys, her heart full, her spirit free. The hungry girl playing for food had found her way home.